You're listening to a CNA podcast.
Walking through the barren hills of northern Thailand, a hot and dusty terrain, and you might not be thinking about chicken wings. The two, though, are directly connected. Meat demand throughout Asia, in fact the world, is increasing every year. We can't get enough. And there's a price to be paid for that hunger. It's being played out in the fields of our region, including in Thailand, the centre of Southeast Asia's agro-meat industry. Hello and welcome to Climate Conversations. I'm Jack Board. Hello as always to Liling Tan. How are you this week?
I'm doing well, Jack. Hello there. I'm thinking about chicken wings now, thanks to you.
What's your preferred chicken wing choice?
You're going to judge me
this. Are you a Korean fried chicken wing? Are you a buffalo wing?
Yes. I'm also ha cheong gai wings.
Nice.
You know what the ha cheong gai is, don't you, Jack? And
tell our listeners.
It's shrimp paste, deep fried, battered chicken wings. It's very popular in our part of the world. And yeah, it is eye-wateringly delicious.
I am hungry, but
yeah.
Now, we have spoken about this many times before, I think, on this podcast. What are your thoughts about eating meat in general?
I would like some now, please.
Okay. Is your climate journalism impacting the personal choices that you're making for yourself and your family? It doesn't sound like much.
Well, I kid around with this. I mean, I do like my chicken and I do like my beef, but we have cut down our beef intake to about 1/5 of what it used to be pre-pandemic. Wow. Yeah. But before we were living in the US, so there was a lot of beef in the US. It was a big part of our diet. But having moved here, we're eating a lot less of that, a lot more chicken, a lot more fish, and a lot more vegetables. Yeah, I wouldn't go so far to say that our food choices are being driven by climate concerns, but it is part of, just moderating what we eat and living healthier. And we are, to an extent, more conscious now about the carbon footprint of what we eat than we were before. What about you?
That's interesting. Yeah, I would agree with you. I think I'm trying to do something quite similar. It can get away from you, I think, how much meat you actually eat. You think 2 to 3 meals a day, you can be having some meat element. And I think that probably wasn't the case in the past. And the story that I did, and we're going to discuss today, is proof that we are just eating so much more meat per person than in the past. And the projections are only going to increase unless there is this huge collective change of behavior. So I think just being aware is good. And if you've cut down your beef intake to 1/5, then that's a great step. Kudos.
A lot more chicken though. Like ha cheong gai.
Okay, and we're going to be getting into chicken quite a lot today. All right, before that, it's quiz time. Quick and simple this week. It's just a true or false. I might add on a few elements later, but true or false for you and everyone else. It takes more water to produce one beef burger than it does to take a 1-hour shower. And a bonus question for you, Liling, which would you say you do more? Would you eat a burger or would you take a shower for an entire hour?
Oh, good grief. What do I do more of? I don't take hour-long showers. I don't know if that's what you do and that's what everybody else does. But I did have a burger last week, probably the first one in several months. Okay. Which one actually takes up more water? I'm going to guess burger just because it's a quiz from you, but I have no idea how much more water.
Okay, good start. Answer will be at the end. Now it's time for our main story this week. So I'm walking in the hills of Mae Jam in Chiang Mai province in northern Thailand. At this time of year, stripped raw. A few months ago, they would have been full of mature maize ready to be harvested. Now, it's a moonscape. On the backside of Doi Inthanon, which is Thailand's tallest mountain, the landscape flattens out, forming these fertile valleys, ideal for growing food. But here, these days, largely the only food being grown is for animals that are destined for our plates. The ground cracks underfoot, there are charred corn cobs. This is a snapshot of the maize industry. Now, maize is grown to feed chickens and pigs for Thailand's sprawling meat operations. And over many years, it's transformed the landscape and the prospects of farmers in the region. And increasingly, there have been calls from scientific researchers, clean air advocates, environmental groups to improve the sustainability of the maize industry and address its impacts on health, soil, air quality, water, and livelihoods.
Thank you for setting the scene for our discussion today, Jack, around your big news feature that's just published on CNA's website and on YouTube.
You're welcome.
Now, when you mentioned this a few weeks ago that you were working on this story about maize farming and how it's altering Thailand's vast landscape, I really wanted to talk about it on the pod, on the Climate Conversations pod here. At the outset, I thought, okay, great. We can spotlight some of the issues with industrial farming, deforestation, and the impact on local communities. But I had no idea of the scale and scope of the problems that this is presenting. Can you tell us a little bit about how expansive and extensive this practice is?
Yeah, it's huge. It's one of the staple crops that's grown here. It's been grown in Cambodia, in Myanmar, in Laos, and in Vietnam. And for a long time, especially in Thailand, maize has been around. But increasingly over the years, as meat demand has grown, and of course, the meat industry is fueled by animals that we need to feed to grow up to a certain, age and size before they're killed, requires maize. And so we've seen generally over the past few decades an expansion of land being used for maize. And most of that expansion has been occurring across Thailand's international borders. So the industry is dominated by large Thai agribusinesses. They have been searching for places to source their maize, and increasingly that's been in Myanmar and in Laos. Thailand is now a major importer of maize from those countries. So I think it's the fourth most grown crop in Thailand.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's huge. And in terms of the kind of crops that it replaced, I mean, we're talking about what? People used to grow rice, pumpkins, vegetables there, and it's just been cleared out, just raised over to grow maize, right?
So in northern Thailand, a lot of these areas that are problematic for growing maize, like in Mae Jam, they are upland areas. So altitude, hills, that used to be forest. Probably after forest, they became rice paddies, and the rice paddies have now been replaced with maize. If we look at places like Myanmar, these were places that people were probably growing opium in the past. If not opium, they were growing their own food. So different types of vegetables. They were subsistence farmers. So these were people growing food for their own consumption or for local use. And instead, now they have been incentivized to clear out those operations or clear out the forest around them to become part of this industrial machine. So they are simply providing maize into the broader system instead of growing food for themselves. And so that presents some of the social issues as well that the story gets into.
And that brings me to my next question about demand. I mean, we're talking about huge demand for meat that's incentivizing these industries to further develop their maize production in Thailand and the Mekong region. Can you kind of unpack this demand for meat and animal feed for us?
So if we look at some data around this, it's pretty clear the trajectory. Overall, it was a 2018 study that found that Asia as a whole could see its meat consumption rise by 78% by 2050. So between 2018 and 2050, a 78% increase. And you can pretty much look at any country in this region and see some of the rises in our demand. So let's look at Thailand, for example. And all of this, I should caveat with, it's running parallel with shifting consumer taste towards eating more meat. We're also seeing rapid urbanization and increasing wealth. So when you have all of those factors, start to see people wanting to eat more meat because they can afford it and it's available to them. And the industry has therefore developed alongside the changes in demographics. So let's go back to 1990 in Thailand. The average person ate 16.6 kilograms of meat every year. Compare that to 2022, it's gone up to 28.1 kilos. If you then project out to 2050, they're expecting, the data shows that each person in Thailand could be eating 41.6 kilos of meat. So it's 2.5 times the amount. Plus, increased populations. It creates this huge strain on the land.
Mm-hmm.
In Thailand alone, there's 1.15 million hectares of land is being used for maize.
Mm-hmm.
And most of that is being used for animal feed.
Yeah.
And if we look at projections for what will be required, not just for maize, but in terms of Thailand's total meat production, meat and seafood production,
Mm-hmm.
the land being used now is nearly double what it was in 1990. And it could be projected at extra 42% more land needed by
Yeah, wow.
2050. So overall, that's nearly 6 million hectares. And that's 84 times the size of Singapore.
Oh, good grief.
That's being used land purely for one country's meat and seafood industry.
There's the dichotomy there as well, isn't it? We keep talking about how the world needs to consume less meat because of its massive carbon footprint, methane emissions, land use, feed production, transportation, all these issues about meat consumption. But yet you're talking about how demand is going up. I've seen numerous studies about demand for meat consumption is going up. How is this sustainable?
I think the answer is it's not sustainable. I didn't even mention the other countries where meat demand is going up as well. Nearly every country has something similar. Vietnam, Indonesia,
Mm-hmm.
China is the big player here, huge population where meat consumption is going up.
Mm-hmm.
There are lots of concerns that this just isn't viable going forward. Trying to find an additional 42% for one country's meat industry in the future,
Mm-hmm.
where are we getting that land? And we're not even talking about climate
Yeah.
change impacting yields. That's why I think the calls are getting louder from various groups to really look at the way this is being done.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's being taken seriously by governments, by the companies that are responsible for these industries, to look at what can be done. Because walking through these landscapes in northern Thailand, and I would have loved to go and see what's happening in Myanmar and Laos, but it's difficult as a reporter to do that. It's eye-opening. These landscapes are just barren beyond what you would believe, and they have been totally ruined by years of overuse and huge amounts of chemicals poured onto them. And I don't even get into that in the story, but if you think about where all these chemicals are going, they're going into the food, they're going into the feed, they're going into the rivers and the soil.
Mm-hmm.
That's another aspect that we probably don't understand well enough.
Going to these places and seeing everything firsthand, you also met with a lot of people from local communities there, the farmers themselves. What was the sense you got from them about the impact on their farming and their rural environments?
The impression that I get is that a lot of these farmers feel like they are trapped in an annual cycle they can't break. At some point, they were incentivized to join this system, to become part of the maize growing that the country and the companies require.
Mm-hmm. Job
And-
creation, right?
Sure. I mean, they were farming for themselves, but the lure of having more money, more disposable income, a lot of them spoke about, we wanted to send our children to school or university in the city, and we needed disposable income to do that. Or we wanted a motorcycle, or we wanted a phone or satellite TV. These types of things required money. And maize was presented to them as a way for them to make more money, instead of just simply producing what they needed to subsist. I met and spoke with Mark Zimmerman. He's a forest and agriculture researcher and activist based in Chiang Mai, spends a lot of time in the forests. He spoke to me about how sad he feels walking through some of these places that have changed a lot, and the ways that local people have been incentivized to become part of this changing agricultural system.
Yeah, well, it's pretty dramatic actually when you look at it with your own eyes and walk through either an intact forest or an area that was a forest just a year or 2 or 5 years ago, and is now dramatically altered. Right? You know, this is a very difficult situation, and they're being incentivized to do something that, in the long run, is probably not in their best interests. Right? Because they're people who have lived for generations in the forest or with the forest, and they're being incentivized to cut their own forest down. And I think that's a very sad and tragic thing. And it all originates with what you and I eat.
Now they are saddled by debt. Rural debt in Thailand is astonishing. It's an even bigger problem in Myanmar.
Mhm.
Can't speak of the other countries that haven't looked so much into it.
How do they accrue the debt? Where's the debt from?
So the farmers need to buy the inputs each season. So they need to buy the seed, they need to buy the fertilizers, the herbicides, insecticides, and each year, because their land is becoming less fertile, they need to buy more and more of this to
Diminishing
get
returns.
the maize to grow. So, and of course, you have a bad year where your yields are not good because it rained too much or it didn't rain enough, and suddenly you're behind square one for the next year. So every year they're forced to take on these loans.
Okay.
As soon as they get paid for their harvest, they service that debt and then have maybe no money left. You start a new loan.
Okay.
And so they cannot break this cycle. So one woman who is the main profile in the story, she told me she would gladly stop. She doesn't want to be doing this anymore. She's 60 years old. She's seen her own landscape turn from something that was bountiful into this dry and barren landscape. She doesn't want to keep farming
That's heartbreaking.
maize, but she has no choice. And if you look at the rural poverty figures in this country, it's quite astonishing. 37.5% of elderly people living in rural Thailand live below the poverty line.
37%.
And 37, so more than a third of older people in Thailand in the rural areas below the poverty line. And if you look at Thailand's poor, 79% of them live in rural areas. So you have this huge subset of society, old farmers who just simply been left behind. And some of the critics of these industries say, look at the companies making vast profits
I was just about to
on the
ask
back
you.
of the labor of these people.
So we've talked about the impact domestically on rural communities, on the landscape, on Thailand's landscape, but this also has far-reaching consequences for the region in terms of the kind of transboundary haze that affects Southeast Asia a lot. Can you tell us about the impact this is having on the air quality, not just in Thailand, but in Southeast Asia?
Yeah, so I think that's one aspect of this issue that's easily seen and experienced by people, the bad air that pops up in certain months of the year, normally around February. And we see northern Thailand absolutely engulfed normally by PM 2.5. Now, of course, maize burning is one of the contributors to this. It's not the only reason why we have bad air in that region at that time of year. But these fields are often burnt after harvest. That's just the nature of the way maize is grown. Often it's on the side of hills. It's very hard to use conventional machinery to clear the waste left after you've harvested the corn. So they need to clear that somehow. They use a lot of chemicals to do this, but they also burn the fields. People like, Sutat, the lady I talked about, she doesn't have enough income to be able to hire workers to clear her land. She doesn't have the means to use more advanced machinery. So the easy answer for her is just to burn that field. And so this is happening right across northern Thailand, but because of the expansion of the industry into Myanmar and Laos, where there are less stringent rules about what people can or can't do, that is the major contributor to air pollution issues, is the haze that's coming across, the smoke that's coming across from those countries, mostly from Myanmar's Shan state at this certain times of year. So the Thai government has tried to introduce legislation. It has a Clean Air Act that it should be probably passing sometime this year that will introduce different measures to prevent this becoming an annual problem. For example, not allowing the importation of maize from fields that have burnt. So that's a step. But it's also very hard to monitor. And you see the environmental impact reports from some of these companies. They're trying to introduce more transparency and monitoring. They use blockchain technology to try and detect where burning has happened, to make sure that their value chains don't include burnt maize. The reality on the ground is that that's seemingly very difficult to enforce. And when there's no economic imperative to change behavior, farmers will simply do what they need to do to survive. Without any alternative, they will continue to burn and will continue to breathe this affected air.
So apart from pressure from environmentalists, some attempts to track and monitor by private companies and the industries, it sounds like it's pretty much business as usual, isn't it? What can consumers do? What can the average person do? Eat less meat? I imagine it would take a lot of people just going off meat to actually make a real dent in demand. And we clearly see that that's not happening. Consumption is just going to keep going up in the near to medium terms. What role can regular people play?
I think they do have an important role, and you speak to some NGOs like Madre Brava who are advocating for climate-friendly policies, who are really pushing for changes in the extent and the sourcing of animal proteins in this region. I think it comes down to government policy, though. If you I spoke to agriculture and meat experts who are looking at the data. Thais are not becoming vegetarians. The rates are around the same, around 10 to 15% year on year, even though people are aware of the environmental impact of eating meat. Increasingly, people are starting to become more aware of this. But economics and price will always trump activism or prompt sustainability decisions when it comes to what you want to eat. So until there are government policies that promote alternative proteins and different types of foods, I don't see there being much change here. As we said, meat demand is going up. I spoke with the Thailand director of Madre Brava, who talks about some of her fears about the way this industry is going.
I dread to think of how it is going to turn out. I don't think we have enough land to grow food for animals. The environmental consequences will be catastrophic. The fish stock is declining. So we have to get our act together now. Government officials, relevant stakeholders, and also business leaders, big business leaders have to recognize the impact that the current food production has on people's life. And they need to come together, agree that, okay, the food system needs to change. We need to become less reliant on animals to produce protein and start having policies that will help Thai people choose more plants in their diets.
So without the government putting in some different rules and different priorities, we're not going to see change here. There are some possible solutions that we know the government is aware of these problems, and they are pushing to grow alternative crops instead of maize. How that answers the questions and the demands of industry, though, I'm not sure.
Okay. Thank you, Jack, for sharing your insight. A lot to chew on there. Guys and gals, look out for Jack's story on CNA's website and on YouTube.
Look for our In Focus story this week. That's where you'll see it.
Great. Keywords: Jack, board, maize,
Sure.
Thailand. Okay.
Back to our quiz question then, to repeat it for you. True or false? It takes more water to produce one beef burger than it does to take a 1 hour shower.
True.
Correct. That's correct. I think you knew that was going to be
Jack board quiz. Yeah.
Would you like to hazard a guess about the difference in the use of water and how close or far apart that comparison is?
So I'm guessing this is going to include the whole chain of production, from the actual cow feeding the cow water, and then
it does
processing
includes
it,
growing the cattle feed,
growing that too. Yes,
which is the primary aspect. Yeah, that's
so we're talking
where
about
the most water is needed.
The whole chain. I have no idea in terms of units, but I'm gonna guess triple the amount of water compared to a 1 hour long shower.
Yeah, that's pretty close. So according to this, a standard 10-minute shower is about 75 to 95 liters of water for 10 minutes. So multiply that by 6, let's call it 500 or 600 liters. For a single quarter pound beef burger can require over 2,500 liters of water. Yeah. So we're looking sort of around 4 times the amount of water than a shower.
Crazy.
That's crazy, right? That's crazy.
For one burger.
Yeah, and mostly it's for the feed. So this story is all about animal feed. And yeah, I think it really shows what it takes to supply our growing meat demand. So yeah, think about that.
I'm glad I cut down beef by quite a significant amount. Okay.
Good on you. All right, that's all for this week. We will be back right here next Thursday. Come subscribe, come rate, come with your comments. Happy to hear them.
Check back here next Thursday. Until then, Liling Tan. Bye-bye for now.
I'm Jack Board. Thanks to the team that produced this episode, Saya Win, Tiffany Ang, Janani Jahari, and Pei Ning Ho.